Hello. Welcome to the Winter 2018 SDS Basic Track Part 2, where we're going to be going over some basic Django features like routes, models, forms, and templates. Here is the main GitHub page for the training, github.com/osu/tackas/Python training. Once here, you're going to see the original install instructions for the virtual environments. We're going to expect you to have your Python 3 with Django installed virtual environment still lying around. We're going to be using that. We'll go into this examples message board. Here is the tutorial for what we will be doing today. We're going to start out with some Python weirdness. The first note is that for loops are only done in the for each form, meaning you can't do the standard let I equals 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. You have to use this range element, which produces an iterable list that in the form of like this if you were to convert it to a list. And this will apply I to each of these values across time. So there's other ways to emulate this behavior, but this exact behavior of defining the variable, checking a condition, and then updating something every iteration is not the same. It's all done right here in the single shot. If you wanted to do something like this, you'd have to emulate this behavior with a while loop in Python. We also have inline list generation. So here's the function that will be executed, and then here's the variable that is being pulled from an iterable. And then it creates a list out of the values of each of these functions for the applied x value. Returning, in this case, something like 0, 0.5, 1, 3 divided by 2 is 1.5, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. Next is noted, as you can see right here, comments are pound signed, different than JavaScript comments. Blocks are defined by colon and then white space. And white space is very crucial. The biggest thing here is consistency. Either choose tabs or spaces and stick with it. Python will complain at you if you don't. And Python is also dynamically typed, just like JavaScript. Before going anywhere, we're going to go back to the home page, and we're going to be using git clone to download this repo. It has, in the examples message board, it has the basic app that we will be starting with. If you don't want to use Git, you can download the zip, extract it, and then follow along from here. We'll be heading over the command line. First thing we do before we git clone, source or activate your previous virtual environment. So, as you can see, I have my env3 here, so we're going to source env3 bin activate. And now Python 3.5 is my main one, and I have Django installed. All right. So now we're going to git clone, and I'm going to paste in that copied link. Clear out some nonsense around it. It's going to clone that directory into my current directory. First thing I'm going to do is change directory into examples message_board. Right here we have the basic root Django directory for where we're starting at today. We first have to set it up, so we can call manage py migrate to initialize the database. We can also call Python manage.py create superuser to create the superuser for the admin interface. I'm going to name mine admin, give it a sudo email, and then admin as the password, so it's not quite similar enough. Next, we're going to actually run this server so we can see what we're starting with. That's python manage.py, run server. This should not produce any errors. Yes. We can now go to localhost 8000 see we have basic message board. There we go. Basic message board is up and running. And we can clear all our messages if we so desire. That's what we're starting with. We're going to exit out this. Okay. Let's see, we're going to change directories. All these files that we're editing are going to be in the board folder. The board is an app of this message board, so the message board is the main Django project, and then we have the board app within that. That just allows you so you can separate multiple functionality in different pages or in different significant apps on one Django project or Django project. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add an edit page so we can edit each of these messages. Now the URL that we want to create that is going to be in the form of edit/a number, where that number represents the message ID. So we have to give it this route from it receives this URL, it parses it, and it goes, here's a function I should call with these parameters to successfully begin this request. So now that we're inside board, we have our files here, and we're going to be editing. I'm going to use Vim for this. urls.py, if I can spell it correctly. There. Hold on, do I have... Might be easier with syntax highlighting to use VS Code. Excellent. So, I'm gonna, for syntax highlighting, we are not gonna use Vim. There. So inside the board folder, back to urls.py, we have these path objects where we define the path that we're gonna do, we define the function. So, excuse me, this path is the edit/number that I was talking about. That's what we will be using. This function is inside this views.py file over here. So when it's called, it actually calls this function passing this request object, which contains all the information for the HTTP request. Next, we define a name. This is so we can reverse look up the URL without having to hardcode the URL everywhere. So if we ever want to change the location of this page, we can change it here, and everywhere else still has the same effects if we want to redirect to the page or provide a link to the page in a template. Okay. So we are going to add a view, and that's going to be path. This R allows the string to stay exactly as written. Normally this would translate to a new line, but with the R up front, it would just stay as \n. This also allows us to do a backslash without having to do this, so we could just do this. We won't be using that functionality, it's just good practice. So we want the page to be edit, and then here we specify a parameter. First we specify the type. This is an integer, it's the ID. And then we specify the name of it, message ID. Then we need to tell it what function to go to, and we're going to call this edit message, abbreviated. And then we're going to name this, just for clarity. It doesn't have to be the same, but edit message. Comma at the end, just so next time we come to this file, we can go right away to adding. Now we're defining in the views method the function that we just referenced. So it's edit message. It needs to be passed a request object and the message ID. Now this does have to be the same as this, so Django can make that link. Now on the inside of our function. First thing we're going to want to do is grab our message object from our database. Now, this is defined here. Django manages the database for you, updates it, but if you update the model, you need to make sure you call make migrations to make the changes to the model happen and then apply them to the database with Python manage py migrate. That make migrations is also Python manage py.make migrations. So here we have this message model. It has a text element with a max length of 144 and a publication date. This is just defaults always to date time to the current time. So we can access the database with message.objects. That accesses the database. Then we're going to filter all those objects on the ID of message ID. This returns a list of everything that matches the parameters inside of there. So ID is always going to be unique, so we can just call dot first. But if you were looking based upon a type and you have multiple entries of the same type, say a text field, then this would return a list of those. Now, this message has two things it could be. It could be the actual message, or the ID could not exist in the database, therefore it's this type called none. And you check for if something is none. The only way to check for it in Python is message is none. This will return true if the message is none, and false if the message is not. None is a singleton, so message is checking if it is an instance of none, which there can only ever be one none in the Python programming. Equality won't work, so you can't do equals equals. You have to do is. If it's none, that means the ID didn't exist, so we're going to return HTTP response forbidden. This is a Django function. And we're going to say message ID not found. I'll get back to that in just a second. So this syntax right here is for what we're about to do, which is formatting the string. It allows us to come back and push something into the string at a later time, but we're going to do that right now. So we're going to pass basically a variable, and that variable is going to be converted into text and placed where these brackets are. So we're going to call .format and pass it message ID. So it lets the user know that message ID cannot be found. So next, we handle the case where the message is actually exists. And for this, we're going to create a Django form. This form has been defined over here. This does not come pre-done. This was predefined for you in this repository. It just defines a text element, some basic HTML attributes, and then this inside class meta is very important. It defines the model relation for this form, so that way the form can immediately apply its data that it has in its different input fields and create and save a model to the database from that. And then you have to specify what fields you're actually using from that model. And in this case, we're only using text. And keep in mind, this name and this name need to be the same. So we're going to reference this as message.form is equal to new message form. And we're going to pass this request.post, which is the post data, or none. I'll get back to explaining this in just a second. Then we're also going to pass instance is equal to message. That last bit's easy. It's saying the instance of the model that we're referencing this form to is message. That way we'll go to that message with all the text and publication date in already and populate the fields in the form automatically. This is a bit more tricky. This is evaluating message.post, and if message.post returns true, it's going to pass request.post returns true. It's going to pass request.post to the form object, which tells the form that it is a post, and that means this data has been provided by the user. But if it's a GET request, then this is going to be evaluate to false, and then it's going to pass none, telling the message form this is a GET request, meaning the data can never be valid. That's the next thing we're going to check. We're going to check if message form is valid. This is checking if, one, make sure it's a post request, as I just mentioned, and two, then it's also going to make sure that all the data fields entered in that form are valid. And if it's not valid, it's not going to get past this step. But if it is valid, that's one nice thing Django does. It does automatic validation for you based off your model and the requirements you've set in your model. But if it is valid, we're going to do message form.save. This is going to take the form, automatically convert it into the model, populate the fields first from this instance message. So it's going to populate all the old data, then it's going to update the data with the new valid data from the post, and then save and commit it to the database automatically. And and once we're done with that, we want it to return it back to the index page from this edit page. So we're going to say return, redirect, we're redirecting it, and we're going to do a reverse lookup to get that URL. And what did we name it last time? Well, we didn't name this one, but the name of the index page is just index. Next, we handle the general case. So if it doesn't return an HTTP, make sure I spell that right. If it doesn't return a forbidden response, or it isn't a post, or it doesn't have valid data, it is going to render the template, which we have not yet created. We will. We need to call render, pass it the request object, that big request we call it, and tell it what file to render. This can be edit.html. Then we're going to pass it a literal dictionary. And this is just passing it key object pairs. So we're going to name this, give it the key message form, and we're going to pass it the message form data. This way the template, which we will get to, has this data inside of it. And we're going to also do this with the message. And that is it for the edit message. We should be able to go one too many. So we should be able to start up our server. Without any errors. And this will still refresh. But if we go edit, and then some random ID, this message right here is 1. It's going to tell us message ID 28 was not found. Right here, see? 28. But if we go message ID.1, it's going to try to render that template. And it's going to fail because it can't find the file. So it throws this template does not exist error. So let's fix that right now. So this templates are in this templates folder, and we need to create a new file. And we referenced the file name earlier was edit.html. So let's create this edit.html file. And we can view this index file here, which is the index page. And the two key attributes you see that does not make this a normal HTML file are these, and stuff that looks like this, these brackets. This is the template syntax that allows us to dynamically generate the template into with the data that we already have. The main thing we want to focus on is this extends base HTML and content page, and block content. So I'm going to copy this over to the edit page. And if you go to the end here, you also see it has this end block statement. Now, if we go over to the base, here we actually see our standard HTML. We have our HTML tag, our head and body tag. We have a title. We're importing some Bootstrap and jQuery. And right here, you see inside this big div container, we have this block content. So when we extend this file and like this, it's going to actually take this and notice that we reference block content and then put it right here. This allows the header to always be the same across multiple pages without having to read the code, and it allows for easier modules between different pages. Okay, so let's edit this. First thing we're going to do is give it a title. This is just basic HTML at this point. edit message. That is the title. Now we're actually going to set up the form. And we're going to give this the class form group. Most of this is just Bootstrap stuff. Again, not relevant to Django. But this is relevant to Django. The location that we're sending this post to, we don't want to manually type out the URL. That way, if we ever change the URL, we don't have to go back and edit and refactor all this code. So that same reverse functionality is given to us here in a slightly different context. We kind of call this pseudo function URL. We give it the name of the URL that we want it to access. The edit message, we named that in our urls.py, if you remember, edit message right here. Then we're also going to give it our message.id. Now this message object was passed in right here inside our view when we pass in this dictionary. So we're referencing that and re-referencing its ID. So this is passing our parameter to the edit message URL. So when it submits, it will submit there. Next thing we want to include is Django's way to worry about cross-site scripting. And it wants to make sure that you are actually submitting the form yourself, so we need to include that tag. Then we need to, Django, when you have invalid data, also returns errors. So we need to display those errors to the user. And a paragraph tag. And here's the first time we see this syntax. This is going to take text from the Django objects we sent it and render it just as text. It's going to encode it as text and put it in this HTML document. So we're going to grab the message form object, which we passed in that dictionary, the text attribute from that form object, which I showed you earlier, errors from that object, and then as text. Now we're going to actually handle the input section. Bootstrap input group. Again, now we're passing it message form and the actual text object, so it displays the input HTML and it renders that for us. We need our submit button. That is it for this page. So as long as there's no errors, we should be able to go. See that our server is actually restarted for us, but let's just double check by restarting our server ourselves. Go here. Refresh this page that has the template does not exist error, and we actually get an edit page. So here we can see that the message right now is just hello world. If we go edit 1, oh, not 11, 11 does not exist, it'll tell us that. Let's change it, submit it, redirects us, it's changed. That is success. So what we're going to do next is add an edit button over here so we don't have to guess the ID. Because if we click clear all, clears all the messages, and we type new message, we add a new message, and we want to edit this again. Well, it looks like it's ID 1. And also, we don't want our users to mess around with this ID 1. ID 1 does not exist because ID 1 has been cleared. When you clear the database, it clears all the data, but it doesn't reset the primary key. So that gets confusing after a few clear alls. So let's fix that by going to our index template file. We're going to find where we're displaying all the messages. So for m messages. We already have a column specified for our clear all button, and we have an empty column in each of the message fields. So let's populate that. So we want a link. So it's going to be A, so we can give it an href. And then we're going to do that back URL lookup again. So again, URL, edit message. We're going to pass it our message ID, which we have been iterating through this message lists that if you look at the index file, was passed this list of messages, all the messages ordered by publication date, to our index page, and we're iterating through them right here, and now we're calling this specific instance for each row in the table. And we also need to finish this off. We need to give it a name, so let's give this link edit. Let's see if it automatically refreshed for us, and it does say edit, but let's fix some of that rendering with a simple float right. There we go. So now if we click new message, it takes us right there. And we can edit this one as well. Excellent. We are editing pages. Now, if you go to the tutorial on GitHub, you will find that there's another thing that you can continue. There's more that you can add. We can add users in and update the model. But this tutorial covers what we covered in the STS Part 2 series. So this is all extra activities that you can use to practice the ideas that you've learned from this. It will actually have you use a Django default user, create foreign keys, update the database. It walks you through it all here. So, thank you for watching.